Hello, welcome to Farm Journal Live. I'm editor Clinton Griffiths from our newsroom here in northern Indiana as we continue to bring you the latest happenings around the agricultural world. And today we begin with some market news. Soybeans up double digits to start the day, really driven off a story we first shared with you yesterday. Now, a day after reports that China might be taking a break from buying U.S. soybeans and pork, USDA coming back confirming a flash sale of 132,000 metric tons of soybeans to China. Reuters reporting private Chinese importers have not received a government order to suspend all buying, although it's reported commercial buyers are being very cautious. Meanwhile, JCI, China reporting the country's monthly soybean imports may reach 11 million metric tons on average during May through June and above 10 million metric tons in July. Now, amid the coronavirus, renewed tensions with China and unrest at home, a new Purdue CME Ag Economy Barometer shows that farmer sentiment has improved slightly. The May survey with a reading of 103. That's up 7 points from April, the April reading of 96, but that's still 40% below its February peak of 168. The survey conducted as USDA announced details of the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program and the COVID-19 crisis still weighing on the minds of producers. Jim Mintert, he's the director for the Center of Commercial Agriculture at Purdue University. He's also co-author of the Purdue CME Group Ag Economy Barometer. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about the results this month. What are the takeaways you think so far?
Well, the driver, I think, behind that small improvement that you mentioned in the barometer was really people becoming a little more optimistic, and I want to emphasize the word little, with respect to current conditions on their farm. We kind of decomposed the barometer into two sub-indices, the index of current conditions and the index of future expectations, and that index of current conditions went up 11 points, and that was the biggest driver. Future expectations, a little improvement there, up 4 points. So the driver, people more optimistic about what's taking place today. And as you mentioned, I think part of that was the fact that the CARES Act announcement with respect to the program details was made while we were collecting data. It was on the second day of our survey. We normally collect data on a Monday through Friday. That announcement came out on a Tuesday. And I think that filtered into people's perceptions a little bit. Those payments are going to be substantial. They're going to be large enough to have an impact. And I think people's responses reflected that to some extent. Having said that, though, as you indicated at the outset, we are still way below where we were back in February. So this is not really a recovery. It's more of a kind of a pause, if you will, or a stabilization. And I think it's important to think about the fact that what we saw in agriculture actually paralleled what we found on the consumer side. So the University of Michigan, of course, has been doing their consumer sentiment survey since the 1950s. Their release last week said that consumers did the same thing. There was a slight rebound in consumer sentiment. So I think overall, people felt like things had stabilized a little bit. Not really a recovery, but maybe we were out of the free fall mode. And I think that brought that sentiment back up just a little bit.
Mr. Mintert, I know some of the things that you do really well is you ask questions and futuristic, forward-looking questions. Talk about some of the questions that were specific to this survey or the research this time around.
Well, we're always asking questions that kind of try to probe underneath for what's driving the sentiment. And so a couple of the things we focused on this month were, first of all, we asked people what's taking place with respect to land values, and we always do that on a pretty routine basis. And people were a little less pessimistic about land values over the next 12 months. A month ago, 35% of the people in the survey said they expected land values to go down over the next 12 months. This month, it was 29%. So a little improvement there, a little less pessimistic. That's still much more pessimistic than back in February when only 13% said they expected land values to go down over the next 12 months. We followed that up and asked people, said, well, it's a little early, but are you starting to think about what's going to take place with respect to cash rent, not for the 2020 season, but for the 2021 crop season? And so we asked people, do you expect to ask your landlord for a reduction in cash rent in 2021 based on what's happened here? And just over 1 out of 4 farmers in our survey said that they did expect to ask for a cash rent reduction. And you parallel that with the response we got on land values, and I think it suggests that we're going to see some downward pressure on cash rental rates into the 2021 crop season. We're going to monitor that as the summer progresses and see how people's response changes. But that struck us as significant to have 1 out of 4 of the respondents say that they did expect to see a reduction in cash rents, or at least we're going to try and see that for the upcoming year.
Yeah.
And then as you look at the ethanol side, with all the plant shutdowns, people are very concerned. That's had a big impact here in the Eastern Corn Belt.
Oh, it's been
here in India.
Yeah, it's been a huge impact, and we've been trying to cover that. It really has changed a lot of the dynamics for this corn market.
Well, yeah. So if you look at Eastern Corn Belt, what it did is it took a very positive corn basis situation, and all of a sudden, instead of having basis well above the 3-year average, all of a sudden we had basis below the 3-year average. So we asked a question. We said, are you concerned about the future viability of the U.S. ethanol industry? And 8 out of 10 farmers told us they were either very concerned or concerned about the future viability of the ethanol industry. And of course, that's a huge driver for corn demand. Roughly 40%, not quite 40%, of corn demand in recent years has come from the ethanol sector. So what happens there has a huge impact on farmer income and prices, obviously. So that was very interesting. And I think that's going to suggest on an ongoing basis, maybe some interest at the legislative level in terms of what we can do to perhaps support the ethanol sector.
Yeah, obviously sentiment does not necessarily translate to reality, but it does show that there's concern about it, and we can expect a renewed focus on that renewable fuels industry going forward. I know you usually ask about folks' interest in making kind of a big purchase in either equipment or facilities. Did you get any research back on that this time around?
Yeah, so we have the Farm Capital Investment Index, and that did rebound a little bit this month. It dipped all the way to 38 last month, which was one of the lowest readings we've ever had on that index. This month, it rebounded to a reading of 50, which is a nice improvement. However, when you go back and look where we were at in February, the reading was 72. So in February, we were close, not quite all the way, but almost at an all-time high for that index. I think the all-time high is 75 or 76. So we were close to that back in February, dropped all the way to 38 in April. A modest, a 12-point move in that index is significant. But if you think about what's taken place there with the tightening of margins, people really need to focus on preserving their working capital. The number one recommendation, the first thing to do when you want to preserve working capital is reduce capital expenditures. And I think we're seeing that. So even though the index did improve somewhat here in May, I don't think this is going to be a good time, obviously, for farm equipment manufacturers, dealers. They're going to still face a very challenging environment, I think, for the rest of this year, but maybe not quite as bad as what it looked a month ago. And the other thing to remember about capital investments in agriculture is this is a very diverse industry.
Sure.
So even in a tight margin environment like we're in today, there are still some people who are still in a strong working capital position. And some of them will obviously still make some purchases. They're still be in a position to expand, et cetera. While at the same time, some other people are really going to be cash strapped, have really perhaps exhausted their working capital. And I think one of the things that's a little different about this go around relative to where we've been the last few years is the idea that the downturn in ag really got started in 2015. We kind of saw that coming at the tail end of 14, but really got underway in 15. This is a 5-year phenomenon now. And so we entered this period with strong working capital. As an industry, we've been pulling that down now for 5 years. And so there are fewer people that have a good working capital position today than they did, for example, just a couple of years ago. And that makes this more challenging going forward.
Jim, I know, we're always trying to figure out what the next cycle looks like. Any indications that we're kind of changing or could see kind of a shift in this cycle, maybe toward the upside, or is there any indication of that yet from an economic standpoint?
Well, the driver for U.S. agriculture is really trade. And so if you think about trying to get optimistic about what's going to take place in U.S. agriculture, you really have to have some optimism on the trade side. So normalizing trade relations, particularly with China, would be huge. If you think about the opportunity that exists there on the protein side, obviously on the feed side, tremendous opportunity in Southeast Asia in general, but especially in China. So that's really the concern I would have going forward. If you're going to get optimistic, we need to see an improvement in the international trade front, export opportunities. USDA has put a lot of effort to that. Indiana's own Ted McKinney is working on that pretty hard. So that's really the concern I would have. You're going to see this turn around. We need to see an improvement on the export side. In the short run, I've got some concerns about domestic demand, obviously, with this level of unemployment, slow rebound probably in a good chunk of the economy. The domestic demand side is not going to be very good either. But longer run, if you think about it, looking out, say, 5 years, I really look towards more of the export side.
All right. Well, I always appreciate the perspective. Thank you so much, Tim Mintert. He's the director of the Center for Commercial Agriculture at Purdue University, also a co-author there of the Purdue CME Group Ag Economy Barometer. Thanks for joining us here on Farm Journal Live. Nothing says summer like firing up the grill. So for Pork Week, we've decided to get some tips for the summer grilling season from a couple of best in the business. Today we've got Chef Neil Sawney, and he is with the Pork Checkoff, and he shows us how to grill the perfect pork burger.
Hi everyone, this is Neil, one of the chefs of the National Pork Board. I'm in my backyard today and I'm going to talk to you about grilling. So the first thing we're going to make today is a ground pork burger. This is an 8-ounce patty that I ground myself with a little bit of trimmings, some pancetta, some bacon, just to really give it a lot of extra flavor, some extra fat. But you can get anything at the supermarket, butcher shop, it'll all work. I'm using a gas grill, which I've been preheating for about 10 minutes, getting it up to 400 degrees. I've cleaned my grates, and now I'm going to season my patty. I use 50% salt, kosher salt, 50% fresh cracked pepper. Season both sides, and then we'll close the lid and check it in about 5 minutes. It's been 5 minutes, now I'm going to flip it over. So don't worry about the flare-ups, it's all just flavor that's burning off on the fire. I'm going to close the lid and let it go for another couple minutes, and then we'll add our cheese and bacon. So it's been about 12 minutes total. One thing you want to check is the internal temperature. Ground meat to 155, so I am good. Turned off the heat. I'm going to add my cheese and bacon and just let it warm up while the burger rests. So I've got your basic condiments here. I've got some spring mix lettuce, I've got some beefsteak tomato, some red onion, some pickles, and then this is a burger sauce that I made. I've also got a nice brioche bun here that I toasted, and I actually used the bacon fat from cooking my bacon, so save your bacon fat, it comes in really handy. So my burger's been resting for about 3 minutes. You can see the cheese is melted, got some bacon on top. This is bacon I made myself, but anything you get from the store, your butcher shop, is gonna be great. Just remember to save that fat. There you go. You have a pork burger with bacon, cheese, and all the classic fixings. I hope you found these tips useful, whether it's a cut of pork or how to cook it, and that you're going to enjoy grilling out with your friends and family this summer. So again, thank you on behalf of America's 67,000 pig farmers.
Awesome. Now I'm hungry. Sounds like it's lunchtime. Thank you so much, Neil, and thank all of you for joining us for Farm Journal Live today. Of course, if you'd like to keep up with the latest happenings around the agricultural industry, make sure you go over to agweb.com, and for the coronavirus impacts agriculture, you can go to agweb.com/coronavirus. From all of us here at Farm Journal, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great afternoon.
It started as social distancing, self-isolation, and caring for loved ones. A time for agriculture to be proud, to be essential. Now, it's changing. While states start to reopen and jobs resume, out here, the clouds are building. The path is uncertain. It's not the first time, it won't be the last. But we'll farm on. This soil is soaked in generations of sweat, of reinvention, of grit. Farm on is a calling. It's a mantra, a mindset. When the horizon dims and things turn dark, we'll find the light. We may be doing this for you, but we're also doing it for them. 2020, now's the time to farm on.